It started like any other Sunday morning, until one message changed everything. Within minutes, silence fell across the Latter-day Saint community. Phones buzzed, hearts broke, and tears fell as the unthinkable became reality. President Russell M. Nelson was gone. Across social media, tributes began pouring in. Thousands of heartfelt messages filled with love, sorrow, and gratitude for a man who had shaped countless lives. The world could hardly believe it. President Nelson always seemed unshakable. His calm smile, unwavering faith, and words of wisdom had guided millions through some of life's darkest storms. For years he stood as a symbol of grace and steady leadership, reminding believers everywhere of hope, peace, and eternal purpose. And now, the thought that his familiar voice would no longer echo through conference halls or Sunday sermons was almost too much to take. Around the globe, members began revisiting his past addresses, replaying his words about love, forgiveness, and faith as if hearing them for the first time. Many couldn't help but notice something in those final messages, a quiet tone of farewell, as if he somehow sensed his time was drawing near. In cities and small towns alike, candles were lit, hymns were sung, and prayers rose from homes and chapels around the world. Yet even as the grief grew, one thing added to the sense of mystery: silence from church leadership. No official statement, no public address. And among all the questions and whispers, one name kept surfacing: Elder David A. Bednar. People began asking, where is Elder Bednar? Why hasn't he spoken? Everyone knew how close he had been to President Nelson, and that silence, it only made the world wonder what was really happening behind the scenes. They had walked the same paths of faith, prayed shoulder to shoulder, and shared countless moments away from the spotlight, moments filled with purpose, conviction, and brotherly trust. Elder David A. Bednar and President Nelson weren't just colleagues in ministry, they were kindred spirits united by a shared mission. So when the news broke, those who truly knew them said the loss struck Elder Bednar deeply. Some whispered that he had chosen to step back, to grieve in silence, and gather the strength to speak from the heart. Others believed he was quietly preparing something meaningful, words that would capture not only President Nelson's legacy, but the depth of the bond they shared. But no one really knew for sure. Days turned into weeks, and still Elder Bednar remained silent. That silence began to echo louder than any statement could. Across congregations, online groups, and living rooms around the world, people could feel it. The weight of a man carrying both grief and gratitude. He was just mourning the passing of a church leader. He was mourning a friend, a mentor, a spiritual father who had helped shape his journey through faith and leadership. Those who had seen them together often spoke of a quiet connection, a relationship built not on words, but on respect, humility, and deep devotion. As the world waited, holding its collective breath, Elder Bednar stayed out of the public eye, choosing solitude over spotlight. He knew that when he finally spoke, it couldn't be out of duty or pressure. It had to come from a place of truth, love, and divine timing. And so, as the church mourned, as voices lifted in prayer and hymns filled the air, one question continued to linger: when would Elder David A. Bednar finally break his silence? And when that moment came, what would he say about the man who had not only changed his life, but strengthened the faith of millions around the world? It was anticipated that he would show up at church headquarters or even deliver a consoling speech on Sunday morning, but all that was heard was quiet. Just silence, no interviews, no declarations, no updates on social media. For a lot of people, that quiet was more powerful than words. According to those close to Elder Bednar, he was devastated. He had lost a spiritual mentor and a father figure in addition to the church president. He prayed for peace and understanding for many hours in private. Sitting in his office with President Nelson's picture next to him, he would frequently look at it with tears in his eyes as he reflected on the innumerable lessons he had learned from the man who had so severely damaged his faith. Elder Bednar has always respected President Nelson's unflinching strength. According to friends, he frequently said that even the most disturbed soul could be calmed by Nelson's presence. Now that presence was gone, Bednar experienced a silent void that words could not explain. He stopped making public appearances in favor of spending time in prayer and contemplating the lessons he had learned from President Nelson about love, service, and humility. The atmosphere in the church headquarters was somber. Memories of President Nelson's leadership appeared to reverberate around every turn. Employees moved silently, expressions of thanks and sorrow on their faces. With a little notepad full of scriptures and quotes that President Nelson had previously delivered, Elder Bednar was freak. Nelson had previously delivered. Elder Bednar was frequently spotted strolling slowly through the corridors, lost in concentration. Later, a coworker revealed that Elder Bednar had penned a brief prayer in that journal. It said, "Lord, help me honor the man who honored you with every breath." His affection for the church community and the depth of his mourning were evident in those statements. The stillness of Elder Bednar came to represent respect. Many realized that his silence was an avoidance tactic. They were in grief. Instead, Elder Bednar decided to pay attention to his heart, the spirit, and the soft voice of remembrance. People started thinking about how Elder Bednar's calm wisdom and great faith had once been lauded by President Nelson. As Nelson stated years ago, he speaks when the Lord moves him to do so. Those were prophetic statements now. It seemed as though Bednar was awaiting that divine nudge for the ideal time, when his spirit and heart would be prepared to express what was to be stated. Elder Bednar found strength in feeling rather than in talking during those times of silence. He prayed every day for the Nelson family, churchgoers everywhere, and the bravery to continue the message his beloved mentor had left behind. And the faithful started to comprehend as the days went by. There was more than emptiness in Elder Bednar's silence. It was devotion. It was love communicated by trust and silence rather than words. Even though the world had not yet heard him speak, his silence conveyed a potent message. Even prophets must grieve. Conveyed a potent message. Even prophets must grieve, but faith never fades. Read the statement. Russell M. Nelson and David A. Bednar had a bond based on trust, faith, and respect long before the public knew them as church leaders. It took them time to become friends. Through years of mutual prayers, in-depth conversations, and spiritual epiphanies that only men of profound faith could genuinely have, it silently blossomed. When Elder Bednar first met President Nelson, he frequently compared it to meeting a man whose heart already understood the voice of God. There was something special about President Nelson's speech from the start, gentle but powerful, modest but full of divine confidence. Nelson's remarks had a profound impact on Bednar, who would later acknowledge that they influenced his views on faith, leadership, and service. Their paths intersected increasingly frequently over time. Elder Bednar found himself captivated to President Nelson's example. Whether it was in private meetings, temple dedications, or while they were traveling together for church duties, he observed Nelson's kind and respectful treatment of all members, regardless of age. He recalled seeing members, regardless of age. He recalled seeing President Nelson pause in a busy corridor to address a nervous-looking young missionary. "You're exactly where the Lord needs you today," Nelson replied, putting his hand on the young man's shoulder rather than hurrying past. Bednar was never able to forget that single sentence. They developed a closer mentorship relationship behind closed doors. Elder Bednar was frequently asked by President Nelson to participate in lengthy, sincere discussions on family and faith. At times, they would study scriptures together in quiet while contemplating on the same passage and experiencing the same spiritual movement. According to Bednar, those were the times when he realized the true meaning of spiritual fraternity, not merely cooperating, but encouraging one another in God's presence. Bednar also saw President Nelson's extraordinary humility over those years. Nelson was a prophet, a world-renowned cardiac surgeon, and a man of science, but he never took joy in his accomplishments. "We are all instruments in the hands of the Lord," he would frequently remind people. "It's not about us, it has to do with Him." Bednar's own ministry was built on these words, which shaped his service, words, and way of life. There were difficulties as well. There were moments when being a leader felt like a burden. Bednar would receive gentle support from President Nelson during trying times. He once informed him that faith does not make troubles go away. However, it provides us with the fortitude to overcome them. As he developed into his own leadership position, Elder Bednar kept that message close to his heart and frequently repeated it to others. The two guys were more than just colleagues. Their spiritual mission was the same. Together, they visited far-off nations and encountered people who were religiously similar yet spoke different languages. Bednar was frequently moved by the members' commitment and saw Nelson's eyes well up with emotions when he greeted them. "This is what the Lord has done." Softly, Nelson would say, "All we are servants." Elder Bednar was likewise treated like family by President Nelson in private. He always inquired about Bednar's wife and kids, sent handwritten notes of encouragement, and kept track of birthdays. Those gestures meant the world to Bednar. They demonstrated that despite his prophetic label, Nelson was a kind and giving person. Over the years, their friendship grew to be one of the most solid ties within the church leadership. Their mutual understanding of what it meant to serve brought them solace as they leaned on one another and prayed for one another. Later, Elder Bednar would characterize it as a relationship based on love, rather than status or power. Therefore, the world lost more than just a leader when President Nelson died. Bednar, David A. It was the passing of a guy who had influenced his spiritual development from the start, a friend and a teacher. Bednar's silence felt so holy because it was based on their relationship's basis of faith and trust. He carried more than pain. For the years, the lessons, and the affection of a man who had lived genuinely for God, it was thankfulness. In the last days of the life of President Russell M. Nelson, he was surrounded by a silent calm, a stillness that looked almost divine. His spirit was still powerful and full of brightness. Even if his body had gotten weaker with age, he continued to smile, pray, and offer words of encouragement to those around him, despite the difficulties posed by his deteriorating health. According to those close to him, he would frequently sit by his home's window and watch the sunrise while softly muttering about God's benevolence. According to his wife Wendy, he studied scriptures and wrote brief messages of appreciation on those mornings. He would grin softly and add, "The Lord has been kind to me." His heart was filled with gratitude rather than fear. He appeared to be aware that his time on earth was coming to an end. However, he maintained the same poise that had characterized his life. President Nelson never complained. President Nelson never complained, even when he was unwell. His focus was always on other people, and his mind stayed clear. He forced Sherbet to call some of his fellow leaders and send love and blessings. Elder David A. Bednar was the recipient of one of those calls. His voice, according to many around him, was warm but serene. Although the chat was brief, it was profound. He expressed gratitude to Elder Bednar for his devotion, faith, and steadfast commitment to the Lord's cause. That conversation felt different. Commitment to the Lord's cause. That conversation felt different. According to Elder Bednar later, it was as though President Nelson was bidding farewell without speaking those exact words. He stayed committed to his objective, even during those precarious times. He kept praying for churchgoers worldwide, reading scriptures, and signing notes. According to his assistant, he would occasionally close his eyes and silently recite the names of leaders, missionaries, families, and others he had encountered during his ministry in the hopes that God would bless them. Everyone in attendance was moved by this modest yet lovely sight. His loved ones flocked around him as his situation deteriorated. They sung his They sung his favorite hymns and read passages from the Book of Mormon. One of them, a hymn that had always brought him comfort in trying times, was, "These Still My Soul." His loved ones' eyes welled up with tears with each verse. President Nelson, however, did not cry. He just grinned. With his eyes fixated on the ceiling, he said, "The work will go on." President Nelson's remarks regarding forgiveness were among the most moving. "I ask for forgiveness if I have wronged anyone," he replied quietly, "and I don't harbor resentment toward anyone who has harmed me. The only thing worth preserving is love." Everyone in the room became silent at those remarks. Heaven itself seemed to be listening. Elder Bednar knew the moment was coming, so he prayed in secret on his last night. Later on, he spoke of experiencing a sense of serenity and spiritual certainty that President Nelson's journey was finished. When word came in the next morning that President Nelson had died quietly, there was both sadness and calm. Elder Bednar closed his eyes and prayed in a low voice, thankful for the man who had shown him what it meant to live a life of faithfulness all the way to the end. Church members were grieving all throughout the world, but there was solace in the way he had departed. He did not depart in terror or despair. In the midst of prayer and love, he departed in grace. His last days mirrored the life he had always led, one that was devoted, modest, and brimming with Christ's light. And those final talks, those last prayers, and that silent strength would always be a part of Elder Bednar's heart. President Nelson, he would later claim, taught more than just words. He imparted knowledge during his life and into his final moments. His death was not the end. It served as a reminder that genuine faith endures forever. It only gets nearer to heaven. Elder David A. Bednar would never forget the phone call he received one quiet evening. The warm glow of a single lamp filled his office as the light outside faded. When the phone rang, he had just finished reading a few scriptural passages. He was startled and alarmed at the same time when he saw President Russell N. Nelson's name on the screen. The prophet's late-day call was out of the ordinary. The familiar voice on the other end was soft but weak when he replied. President Nelson said, "I hope I didn't disturb you, David." "Not at all," President Bednar said in a kind voice. "How'd it feel right now?" A brief pause occurred, one that was heavier than normal. "I have been blessed by the Lord."